What's up, gamers? I've been on this phase recently where I want to try to fuse archetypes in Standard, because I think these types of decks in Vanguard's past have been a lot of the cooler decks in the game. We used to see it a lot during the OG era with decks like Invincible Overlord, where you'd play Mr. Invincible as your Vanguard and Dragonic Overlord as your rearguard, since Mr. Invincible gives you consistent countercharge, and then you would be able to do Dragonic Overlord skill more than once within a game. We saw it during Legion era, where there would be combinations of like Thingsaver and Phantom Blaster Abyss, and you just play both of those, so every card in your deck just restands. But also during G era, a really big one was Chaos Messiah, where you played both Alter Ego Messiah and Chaos Breaker Dragon, and you kind of just have like two game plans in one, where the decks just kind of meshed sometimes, or you'd stride into a Messiah while you have a Chaos Breaker name, so then you have access to your Messiah rearguards. And then on the opponent's turn, while the stuff is locked, then you can use Chaos Breaker to retire those locked units and draw more cards. So throughout Vanguard history, there's been a lot of that, especially during early G, where decks would have a Legion and also like a Strider. And I really wanted to try to capture that again in Standard, but it's really hard because of Persona Ride. Persona Ride incentivizes you to just stick just one whole archetype, because if you miss out on Persona Ride, you miss out at least 30k free power, and for most decks even more, because you have ways to multi-attack. And also these type of hybrid builds are typically less consistent because you're trying to shove two different archetypes into one deck. But there are a couple of cards that can kind of bypass this restriction, and the first one is grade 4 decks. Grade 4 decks are built to not rely on Persona Ride, since you would typically be on grade 3 and then ride in a grade 4. But the last mechanic are the mask units. If you're unaware, mask units are built around this card Mask of Hydrogram, which allows you to superior ride into a mask unit from a normal unit. And if your opponent is grade 3 or higher, and you have not Persona ridden this turn, then you activate Persona Ride. Typically, mask decks have a huge package with them, and it's a pretty piece-reliant deck. You typically have to play 2 Mask of Hydrogram, and then also 4 of the Mask Searcher within your deck, just to make it consistent enough. So a lot of the time, these mask decks need very specific pieces at certain times in order for them to work. Recently in set 5, they came out with these new grade 1 cyclers that make mask decks just a lot more consistent, because they can find either mask units or the mask itself. These new grade 1 are honestly really needed in this type of strategy, since they can only grab different named grade 3s from your Vanguard. So they actively can't search Persona Ride, and they incentivize you to try to find a different unit. A lot of the time it's for some grade 3 support card or a grade 3 order, but in this context, it's actually a really big piece finder in order to find a different unit. So for this deck, our ride line is the original Levidras ride line. The grade 1, while you have a grade 0 in soul, lets you ride into the grade 2 without discarding. And then whenever you ride over the grade 2 with a Levidras, you can Energy Blast 3, check top 5, and add a grade 3 or less to your hand. So this ride line is just naturally really good, especially in a mixed archetype style of deck, because Manta Scythe will give you extra chances to find missing pieces you need for either side of the archetype. And then we're playing OG Levidras because this deck is built around the Squirrel and being able to abuse the Squirrel. And we are also playing Carment in here, so we want to be able to consistently be able to call Carment off of its skill, which doesn't require a Levidras Vanguard. You just need to have 3 Infinity Eyes markers in play. So this deck tries to just blindly go second, and you utilize Levidras's Divine skill in order to produce 4 markers total. There is another route where you could play Imperio in the ride line and then play OG Levidras in the main deck. The one issue with that is that takes up more deck space, because ideally you would play at least 3 OG Levidras. You would play 4 if you want to try to make that portion as consistent as possible, and you'd be able to have a much stronger turn 3 than with OG Levidras. Having OG Levidras in ride line, though, saves that deck space for other cards that you can play. I think either of these options are fine to do, and you can change this deck however you want. This is still very early in the works. And now for the rest of the Levidras package. We're playing 3 Carment. On attack, you can retire another rearguard to give it plus 10k, and then at end the battle, you can retire it to draw a card. Carment's just like a broken card. This card's stupid. It's a free attacker that can come out every single turn, It hits for a really nice magic number of 23k, and if you have any additional power boost to it, so like Persona Ride, an Infinity Eyes marker, or just a booster, it just gets much larger and is just like a really good attacker. And then it kills itself in order to draw a card. So essentially, if you call this from your drop zone, then you're killing one rearguard in order to convert that into a card in hand. And we really want this to be able to pop a rearguard because of the Squirrel. So in tandem with Carmnet, you'll be able to empty that back row Infinity Eyes marker slot, so then Squirrel can move into it and then either attack or boost that one too, just giving you an additional attack. And usually Squirrel gets very big. Then last for the Levidras package is 3 Enatagaster. We really only care about the first effect because there's no other energy blasters in this build, which allows you to just check top 2, add one to hand, put the other on top and bottom, and it gets plus 5k. It is good on your grade 3 turn because you want to set up your first Infinity Eyes marker in your back row, and then once you set up the total of 4 markers from Levidras, then Enatagaster can attack from back row. So your typical turn 3 setup is a Levidras Vanguard, Enatagaster in the back row Infinity Eyes marker, so then Enatagaster will swing for 30, and then Carmnet will swing for 33. And then you also clear your board. But Enatagaster is just a good way to spend your energy in this deck. Now, I only showed really 9 cards in the main deck. The actual main package of this deck is Magnolia Mask. Why are we doing this? In order to understand, we first must read Magnolia Mask. So you can only ride it on a grade 3 Magnolia. So you can't go from Levidras to Magnolia Mask. But any unit on your Dragon Tree marker gets plus 10k power and can attack from the back row, which is the primary thing we're looking for. It is free multi-attack and also a huge power boost. So in tandem with Squirrel, we will be able to have it attack from back row. It'll also just naturally gain a ton of power. We'll get plus 15k from the Dragon Tree marker plus Magnolia Mask effect, making it 23, and then whenever you move it, it'll be 28. And that's not counting triggers or potentially other power boosts it could get. So Magnolia Mask is looking for very specific things for it to work. First up, you have to play the Mask of Hydrogram in your deck, which will allow you to cheat into Persona Ride. So how this would work is on your turn 3, you do Levidras, do a bunch of draw effects through Carmnet and Enatagaster, and then on the next turn, you would ride Magnolia, use Mask to Persona Ride Magnolia Mask, and then you are in full swing for the rest of the game. So the other cards that make this work, we have to play 4 Depthy Welleth, which searches for Mask of Hydrogram and also plays a Dragon Tree marker, which are both really important for a Magnolia Mask build. But having the only way to build Dragon Tree markers locked behind a Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1 is not the most efficient, especially when we want to revive units later on. So also playing 2 of the grade 1 Dragon Tree, which is essentially just on play Counterblast 1, make a Dragon Tree marker. The second effect doesn't really come up. It's Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, and add a normal order from your drop back to your hand. And the only one we're playing in the deck is the Mask. So that one will basically never come up. And then for the really scary part about Magnolia Mask, we're also playing 2 Sorol. Essentially, Sorol just gives you Persona Ride power to your back row as well. So it's a full board power boost, which is really nuts in a deck that can multi-attack through the back row. So with a card like Squirrel on a Dragon Tree marker on Persona Ride turn with a Sorol in play gets plus 25k power, making it 33. And then after it moves over, it becomes 38. This isn't counting trigger power with it either, so if you hit 1 trigger and can pass it on the Squirrel, then it goes 43-48. And after you boost with it, it can swing 48 just by itself. Depending on your opponent's hand situation, you could boost with it and just have a like 70k plus swing with it, which is really powerful. Sorol also has the additional effect where you can check top 5 for a Magnolia, but you can only do it while you're on a Sylvan Horned Beast. So sometimes you'll have to like RNG to try to hit the Magnolia Mask that you're missing if you only have OG Magnolia in hand. A lot of the time you really just go for the Magnolia play turn 4 every time, because even if you just have OG Magnolia in your hand and no Mask, you will typically have like 3 more ways to search top of your deck for Magnolia Mask anyway. Now the one thing is you might want to try to bump Sorol up to 3 if you can, because having this in play actually makes this deck very lethal. If you don't have Sorol in play, the numbers in this deck become a lot more lackluster, especially if you don't have a full setup of Dragon Tree markers yet. And then the last card of the package is one of the most broken cards in the game, actually, which is Force-Grow Dragon. So whenever you call this and your Vanguard's Magnolia Mask, you call units from your drop zone equal to the number of Dragon Tree markers you have. A lot of the time, if you have 3 markers in play, then you're gonna shoot to try to call Carment, Squirrel, and Sorol. If you have less than 3 Dragon Tree markers, you are able to call other Dragon Tree wretches from before in order to try to make more markers. But Force Grow really just makes this deck function late game because you're kind of negging a lot in this deck because you're trying to dig for pieces in order to make the deck work. And Force Grow lets you just get it all back. We're only playing 3 instead of 4 that usual Magnolia Mask decks play because we really actually rarely just cheat into Magnolia Mask because we need to do Levidras turn to make all of the Levidras cards function. And this card is completely a brick until you hit turn 4. It's not a very good beater, and it doesn't really help make the deck more consistent. All it does is give us a huge payoff by the time we get there. And as it for the Magnolia package, the rest of the deck is pretty self-explanatory. We're playing 2 of the new grade 1 cyclers. We have so many ways to top search for grade 3s already through Mask of Hydrogrum, Sorol, Manta Scythe, Anatagaster, all of these cards. Now, this is really the best one, but all it really is a consistency searcher and then sometimes a 10k shield. The one big thing this can do compared to the other searchers though is this can find Carmnet, which Carmnet is our strongest rearguard piece. You can also bump this up to 3 if you want to. I would not go 4. That's a bit too much because they start clogging your hand. 3 is the absolute max I would go, but 2 has felt like okay. And then yeah, the rest of the deck is just like generic stuff. 4 Sentinels, 8 crit, 4 heal, 3 effect draws. Effect draws are a bit better than fronts in here, mainly because you are an extremely piece reliant deck. But since this is a blind second deck right now, fronts are still like fine to help alleviate turn 3 pressure that you might have to deal with. And then playing Blessed Favor. Blessed Favor is just really good. The only other OT I'd consider is Purple OT, since you can then heal at any damage point, but this deck isn't very fast, so you should always have equal or more damage than your opponent anyway to be able to heal off Blessed Favor. So some important tips that you need to do for this deck. Your first Infinity Eyes marker will always be in the back row. If you go first, then you will always put it in back row. If you go second, then you'll play one in back row and then play one in the front row. Having a marker on both sides gives you a lot more freedom on being able to use your Levidras support cards because Anatagaster and Carmnet need a marker on the same column as it. So very rarely you'll have one here, unless if you're like stuck on Levidras for a turn. Then you'll put your third one here, which very rarely happens. You just shotgun the Magnolia ride as soon as you can. Then your Dragon Tree markers, you want to put your first one on your first Infinity Eyes marker. This way, whenever you move the Squirrel here, you also have a Dragon Tree marker here as well. And then Squirrel will just have a giant power boost with it. And then you just go from side to side, essentially, with the rest of them. And then once you get more, you just put them in front row, because Magnolia Mask will give power to your front row as well if they're on a Dragon Tree marker. You just get way more value putting them in the back row first, since it gives the units the ability to attack from back row. Then there are some optimal sequencing you want to do. So if you have Mask in drop zone, Magnolia Mask in your hand, you first want to play Anatagaster. Usually Anatagaster will be the one sitting here, and then Carment will pop it. Then you'll do Anatagaster in order to check top 2. You add one of them to hand, and then the other card, if it's a card you want in your hand, then you leave it on top. If it's a card you don't want, then you put it on the bottom. And then you can Persona Ride mid main phase and then draw that top card. If Anatagaster happened to check something you wanted both of, then this is a way to be able to get into it. And then your optimal board setup is this. This board setup can get pretty nasty because if you Persona Ride this turn, this will swing for 20 and then give 5k to Van. Then Van will swing for 28. You do a twin drive. If you check any triggers, you pass it to Squirrel. So let's say we hit 1 and gave it to Squirrel. And then Anatagaster was usually played on this turn. So it has plus 5k from itself, plus 5k from the Dragon Tree marker, plus 10k from Magnolia Mask, and then plus 10k from Persona Ride, which makes it plus 30, which will make this 40k by itself. Then you can swing with Carment and Squirrel. You do Carment effect to retire Anatagaster, which will make it 13, 23 from Persona, 33 from its own skill. And then Squirrel will have plus 10k from the trigger, 10k from Magnolia Mask, 10k from Persona Ride, and then 5k from the marker, making it 43. So 43 plus 33, this is swinging for 76. Then at the end battle, this will die and you draw, and then you can do scroll effect to move it over here. And this will swing for 33 by itself, and then this will swing for 48. So this turn is really strong, and unlike the normal Levidras build, this turn takes less resources the turn of to do, but it takes more setup to get to. But once you get to this point, then essentially you will no longer have problems with resources. And that is essentially it for this deck. This deck has been really fun to theorycraft and test hand, and it's still far from perfect, but the general idea is there. One thing I've learned through this experiment is that Levidras is just a really good piece on building a second archetype around with, because the really good Levidras cards don't need you to have a Levidras Vanguard, so they're still full power. And also Carmnet is just a broken card. Every deck that can play it wants to play it, and having that as something you get access to when you're playing Levidras is just really big. Levidras' support cards are just really good at generating advantage, so pairing it with a deck that just naturally is way more offensive makes these pieces just work pretty fluidly together. Now, this deck will become a lot better once Stoicheia gets the new Dragon Tree Vetch that Dragon Empire and Keter got in set 6. And this deck could be even better if Magnolia gets a new form in this new season. But until then, this is something I'm rocking with right now. And I hope there's more ways to build decks like this in the future for Standard. And that's all. Thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you guys in the next one.